Hello. In this morning's service, we hear music taken from the third part of the Messiah, that is, from the portion dealing with the resurrection, with ascension, with the promise of the life to come. We hear a wonderful sequence of three pieces: a recit, a duet for alto and tenor, and a chorus, all related to one another. In fact, they are preceded by the very dramatic bass aria for bass and trumpet, "The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised," combined with the subsequent recit, duet, and chorus. These five movements are all taken from 1 Corinthians. The set of three that we hear this morning begins with the alto recit, "Then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory." What a dramatic text. Death is swallowed up in victory. Handel takes that text from the recit and proceeds into the duet, which he sets in a very kind of mocking, taunting way. The words are so confident, and the singers sound very confident of victory, that they proceed to taunt death. "Death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" And they kind of circle around, one and then the other, going above, and then the next voice goes above, and the next voice goes above, and the continuum of the bass line does these little circles ascending, almost as you can just sort of see folks standing around death and the grave and taunting it, almost like it's a game. Handel transforms this duet into a movement for chorus, and the text also changes, and the text is, "But thanks be to God who giveth us the victory." And in Corinthians, the text has that word thanks just one time, "But thanks be to God who giveth us the victory." Handel, however, sets it 4 times. He says, "But thanks, thanks be to God." So we hear that word 4 times, and this truly is a chorus of thanks, something that can never be said too much. Thanks be to God. This is also a very interesting scene because it's very operatic in nature. And of course, oratorios have a lot in close affinity with operas. Handel wrote operas, loved Italian operas, wrote lots of Italian operas. In fact, his first 2 oratorios were also written in Italian. Oratorios, after all, had their start in Italy. And so there are many things which are the same. That is the use of soloists, the use of chorus, recitatives. Messiah is unusual from many oratorios for several reasons. And we'll discuss a few of those later. This particular scene, as I mentioned, has the duet and then the chorus. There are 4 other times in the Messiah that Handel actually used a duet, although we don't hear it as a duet. He borrowed music from himself, from some secular Italian duets that he wrote just 7 weeks before Messiah. These secular cantatas were the basis for some of our most beloved choral movements: "For unto us a child is born, and he shall purify, his yoke is easy, and all we like sheep." They began their life as secular Italian duets. It is interesting that they are some of the most virtuosic and challenging choruses in Messiah, which of course naturally makes sense as they were written first for solo singers. This duet, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" is the only duet we hear in the Messiah. The soloists in the rest of the Messiah always sing by themselves. Messiah was unusual in several ways. One of them was that the soloists, unlike in most oratorios, were not named characters. That is, the soprano wasn't representing a certain biblical character or person, neither was the alto or the tenor. They were just singers in those voice parts. For instance, in another oratorio, in Samson, there would have been Samson, or in Judas Maccabeus, you would have had Judas Maccabeus or Simon. That is, the different voice soloists sang actual roles, and they sang dialogue, and that was part of the story. So Messiah is unusual in that the soloists are not named characters. There is no dialogue, except for that short little passage from Luke in the first part of the Messiah. But even there, it's so minimal. And there's no story in the traditional sense. Yes, we do follow, roughly speaking, the life of Christ, and we are commenting on and thinking about the meaning of that, but it's not a story in the traditional sense. So this is part of what makes Messiah unusual. There are also very many choruses in Messiah, and several years prior to writing Messiah, Handel wrote one of his great oratorios, Israel in Egypt, and that was full of choruses. In fact, it had 28 choruses and not that many solo movements. And so Messiah followed close after that. In some of his later oratorios, the balance shifted back to more solo movements and less choruses, but Messiah certainly has lots and lots of choruses. In terms of choruses, chorus size is an interesting thing to think about and how that has changed over the years. The original performances during Handel's lifetimes were essentially performed with a small chorus, a chorus probably similar in size to what we have at Covenant. Although the makeup of the voices, in some cases it would have been perhaps boy trebles singing and a mix of female altos and male altos. But roughly speaking, it was a similar chorus size, 30 or less voices, maybe 20 voices. That changed pretty dramatically, beginning with performances in 1784, held at Westminster Abbey, which is where Handel was buried. And in fact, these performances were to commemorate the 25th anniversary of his burial and the 100th anniversary of his birth. And at these performances, there were 261 singers and 229 instrumentalists and 3 conductors. So quite large forces, almost 500 performing musicians. And that was the beginning of a trend that lasted for almost 150 years, almost 200 years, over 150 years, up until the very late 1950s, 1960s, at which point there was a movement to sort of get back to what we believe might have been Handel's intention with smaller forces. The large performances that happened through the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century were large forces. They were modern instruments. Sometimes they were reorchestrations. The first one that happened was Mozart's, but there were later ones that added trombones and cymbals and all sorts of other instruments that Handel didn't have to make just a more dramatic and large-scale effect. Tempos also tended to slow down with those large forces, and the music oftentimes became sort of very one movement and then the next movement and then the next movement. And sometimes what was lost in those performances was a sense of drama. And so for sure, as things began to change in the 60s and beyond, and in part that was helped out by the early music movement, trying to get back to the roots of what Handel wanted. And of course, as I mentioned, Handel wrote lots of operas and loved operas. And opera, by nature, is drama. And so his oratorios were also quite dramatic. And that means that we really do need to have a good sense of pacing between the movements. For me, the two places that I have done full performances of the Messiah were here in Cleveland with Apollo's Fire. So of course that was with period instruments and with a great sense of drama, as the conductor Jeanette Sorel is famous for her motto of passion, period. And so there was a great sense of drama, excitement, and the chorus plays a big part of that. Not just sitting on the sidelines, but being very active. Earlier we had heard a chorus, he trusted in God that he would deliver him. And to me, that has a lot of almost like a crowd scene in the Passion oratorios. And so it's a very active, energetic type of music. And the other place that I have performed Messiah is at the Oregon Bach Festival, and that's on the recording that you hear, and that's with Helmut Rilling. And of course, one of his specialties was the oratorio passions of Bach, and they are filled with drama because they're telling the story of the Christ's last moments and his words and his death and dying. And the choruses in Bach's work were very much involved, especially during the turbo choruses when they took on the roles of the crowd. So in Helmut's performances, he carried that sense of drama over to the Messiah, as did Jeanette with her early music emphasis. So in all of those situations, there is just a wonderful sense of activity and energy, and that is what the Messiah music needs. It needs this kind of fervent commitment and passion. The music is very pictorial, very dramatic, and it really benefits from being performed with a sense of intensity and urgency. And we hope that you will hear that in our performance today, and that you have enjoyed what we have done for you here at Covenant, and also listening to the outside resources. Thank you.